It's live now.
What? You see it?
It's live. Yeah, it says in the corner, you're now on live stream. On
It
Facebook.
says setting up your meeting. It says over here. Okay. All right. Now I got to get back to my screen share. Where is that? Oh, here it is. Now I got to get it to, we're getting in there. How do I make it large? You guys going to stop the share and then go back, or you don't know what I'm seeing, do you? What do you see? You see what do you see?
I see the Parsha overview and some of the people.
Yeah, but it's not the whole page, right? For some reason, because I did what I did, I don't see it as a whole page. I'm gonna.
You're looking for the Parsha overview?
It's not that. It comes on my whole screen. I like to see. And for some reason, because I hit Facebook, I lost the large screen.
If you go to the bottom and click on the Zoom icon, it should bring it back up.
Let's see. Okay.
And we are live on Facebook.
I know. I hear people hearing us. It's okay. Everybody struggles with this sometimes. And I'm going to stop sharing and then hit share again. It didn't work. The Zoom link over there. Oh, maybe that's it. Let's see. Try this. No. I'm going to stop sharing and then hit share again. No.
Okay.
No, that's not going to work. Okay. Screen share. Okay. Let's see. Pause share. Okay. Forgive me, I'm getting there. Don't know what I did. Okay. You want to start? Let's see. This. Here twice. What was that? I'm hearing myself. Do you hear that?
I hear you. Do you?
It's not. I'm on here twice somehow.
Uh-oh.
Yes, uh-oh is right. I'm scared if I go out, I'll lose you guys.
Do you have your Facebook open?
There's a delay. There's a delay. You hear me? You hear my recording?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I went out of Facebook.
Okay.
Up share. And now share screen. Okay, I think I can't do the Facebook. That's what it is. Here.
No, you're on Facebook still.
I'm still on. Are you sure?
Yep.
Do this.
You are.
I got it. We're in. Great. Okay, wonderful. Hi, everybody again. Thank you.
Hi.
Thank you for your patience. How long did that take? Let's see. Only a couple minutes. All right. So today's lesson will be, as the title suggests here, our claim to the Holy Land of Israel, the uniqueness of Israel, and our special right to it. So before we get into the Torah claims, the Torah-based claims that tell us and give it a little bit more of an understanding of how the Holy Land is our land, what we should do probably is go to a couple of arguments, common arguments that people give in order to get a proper perspective. So we're going to give an intro to the way arguments that we hear all the time about the land of Israel. So pipe in if you have something to say about it. But the question that we're going to ask and look at is what makes it ours? What makes Eretz HaKodesh, the land of Israel, Yerushalayim, what makes it our land? We know that that's a favorite pastime of Jew haters since Israel was founded, that we don't have a right to the land. And there's a rambling, constant rambling, anti-Israel sentiment, BDS, and especially since social media has come to such a prominent stage, it's all, we all know, we all see it, it's all over the place. And especially when we have the climate that we do today, there's a lot of radicalization that didn't 10 years ago, 20 years ago was not like this. And what's most interesting is, so this anti-Israel sentiment against Israel and so on also creeped in a bit to the Jewish community as well. So we know, obviously we who are sitting here, we know and realize that we should really stand proud. We do. Jews need to stand proudly in support of Israel. We want other Jews to stand proudly in support of Israel. So as a result of understanding that that's where we're headed, what is our claim to the land? So first, we're going to go through common arguments that are made to our claim to the land. And then we'll go to something from our parsha. So let's begin. This is something we hear all the time. And the first thing is the argument that international law, we always kept, the Jews or the state of Israel always kept international law. And the international law argument goes as follows. At the end of World War I, the Ottoman Empire was defeated. And they were defeated by, so the British government came along and took back its former property that it had, called Palestine. And they issued what was called the Balfour Declaration. If I'm not mistaken, this is the early 20s, certainly after World War I. And they wrote in the Balfour Declaration, Sir Balfour, quote, "The establishment in Palestine of in Palestine is of a national home, is for the purpose of a national home for the Jewish people." So the British mandate put that in, and that was incorporated for the British policy for that purpose. So Israel would be, or is, a national home for the Jewish people. So in 1947, we know the United Nations then went ahead and approved a partition plan. And they agreed that Palestine would be divided. Part of it would be a Jewish state, and part of it is going to be an Arab state. So the Jewish community who lived in Israel at the time accepted the compromise. And as soon as the British mandate ended in 1948, in May of 1948, May 14th, that's when the state of Israel was born. So the argument goes, of course, that the Jewish right to Israel is fully supported by international law. I mean, it is fully supported by international law. Yet, we all know, we make that argument all the time. Anyway, that's an argument that's made. So that's argument number one. And there are Jews who proudly defend Israel based on the fact that Israel has fulfilled all the mandates of international law, and nobody should say boo about it, because that's the reality. Then comes another argument, and by the way, when in the Israel state of their Declaration of Independence in 1948, they included this argument. That the community of Israel deserves this land based on international law. They also included another argument, and people make this argument to this day, and that was about survival. We know that the Jewish people, without a doubt, and we needed a country simply for survival. During the Holocaust, the Nazis, Yimach Shmam v'Zichram, may be eradicated their memory. They slaughtered 6 million Jews. And the nations of the world at that time closed their borders. And it refused to let them in. There was even stories in the United States that didn't let Jews in. And even when the Allies were fighting against the Nazis, they refused to bomb the train tracks. So the lesson learned, as this presentation has always made, is that we can't be a stateless people. Because if we're a stateless people, we're powerless, and we're only going to be dependent on people who hate us, or at best, people who are indifferent to our needs. Only a sovereign people, is how the argument goes. Only a sovereign people with their own country, their own government, their own army, are capable of defending themselves. So that's another argument and presentation, and this was also incorporated in Israel's Declaration of Independence. Good argument. So those are two arguments. Anybody think of a third one that we always make? I'm not talking about the Torah one, but one that's made all the time. So also you might say, oh yeah, and that's a simple one. It's a powerful one. And that is, Israel has been the homeland of the Jewish people for more than 3,000 years. King David was in Israel. King Solomon was in Israel. All the kings of Judah, all the kings of the rest of the tribes of Israel, the Chashmonaim at the time of Hanukkah. And there's irrefutable archaeological proof, historical proof, corroborated by an incredible amount of evidence. So, and Jews have lived there all the time. So the argument goes, of course, that, and even while we were under a foreign rule, there was always Jews living there. And that's the way it is. So if you go on college campuses today, and you, unfortunately, the voices that say this are not strong enough. They're getting better sometimes, but there's a lot of voices drowning that out. But these arguments together make a strong case. So some people suggest that if we did a better job of sharing all this information with our children, with our students, we would oppose all the hypocrisy that's out there, the double standards. It would make a huge difference. And there's a big effort to do that. At least some of the anti-Israel voices will vanish among Jews and non-Jews. That's the argument. So, if we want to stand proud as Jews, and if we're going to present these kind of arguments, we also better know the counter-arguments. The ones that say these arguments are not really good arguments. And what I'm about to share as counter-arguments, and I'm not vouching for these arguments, but I'm going to say that you're dealing with, it becomes an argument. It becomes debatable in many cases. Let's go back to the first position that we stated. Why does Israel belong to us? Why should the land of Israel, state of Israel, land of Israel belong to us? International law is what we said, is what we started with. So the argument made against that is you guys say, you Jews say, it's international law because the Balfour Declaration and the British Mandate set this up, and the League of Nations said that it belongs to that you accept. They made a partition plan. Who gave them the right to do that? Who gave England the right to say that it's a homeland for the Jewish people? It's immoral colonial activity. So when you make that argument, you hear this argument back. Then you make the second argument, and you start screaming, and you say, well, look, we can't be a stateless people. We're going to survive. Look at all the anti-Semitism, the terrorism that's been out there for thousands of years. Look what the Nazis did. We must have a state. So some people will argue back to that and say, that's nice. I agree. You should have a state, but pick a different country. Who asked you to be in Israel? You've got a sea of enemies surrounding you over there. And in fact, maybe it's worse for you to have one country where you're all concentrated. Based on the anti-Semitism that you're saying, if you're all concentrated in one place, that may not be so safe. Look, when Iran wanted to throw, wants to throw a bomb, God forbid, if you're all concentrated in the same place. Look at the 6-Day War. all the nations around Israel, Jordan, Syria, Egypt, they all wanted to take it. Maybe you shouldn't be in one place. And who says you should be there? Have a state. I don't know if you're familiar, but Theodor Herzl, when he wanted to establish a state, he first wanted to establish it in Uganda. Kenya, Uganda, that area. He didn't need Israel. So that's the one that argues that back. The third argument we said, listen to this one. Third argument was, hey, we're there for 3,000 years. You can't argue that. King David, King Solomon, the Hashmonaim, all the kings of Israel. Oh, wait, and there's always Jews there, and so on and so forth. So, you know what? Just because a nation was there and was conquered, if you want to go look at the precedent of history, that doesn't mean they're there forever. Look, take Egypt. Before the Romans conquered Egypt, the Greeks were there for hundreds of years. And then the Romans conquered. And then the Muslims conquered. Should the Greeks go back and say, we were there before you? Everybody accepts. I'm not saying it's right to accept that way, but the fact is, all over the world, when one country conquers another country, it's accepted. They conquered them. That's the way it is. So, should the Dutch be able to go back and take over New York? So they argue back. There's no right to take back the land. You're not. In fact, we're not even the original owners. The Canaanites lived there before the Jews lived there. So maybe the Canaanites should get it back. So those are the arguments and counter arguments that are made. And with this brief introduction, let's go to our parsha. Okay? So now we're going to learn the core of our claim to the land. It's a claim that rises above any previous historical or political events. And once we get an appreciation for the core, we'll discover just exactly how deep our relationship to the land of Israel is. Let's begin with our parsha. Okay. What does our parsha talk about? It talks about Isaac, talks about Yitzchak, Avram's son, and Rivka. And there's a point in the parsha where Isaac has a situation in the land of Israel that's similar to the way what his father had. There was a famine in the land. What did his father and his mother do when there was a famine in the land of Israel? They left. They went to Egypt for a while, and then they came back. So Isaac wanted to do the same thing. But here, in this week's parsha, look at verse 2 on the screen. And God appeared to him, Isaac, and said, don't go down to Egypt. Dwell in the land that I will tell you right here in this land. Stay here. And then he tells him, sojourn in this land, travel on, and I will be with you, and I will bless you. Don't worry about the famine. For to you and to your seed will I give all these lands. And I will establish the oath that I swore to Abraham, your father, that I promised him the lands of Israel. So that's the case. Why couldn't he leave temporarily? Side issue. There was an issue that Isaac couldn't leave the land of Israel, whereas Abraham could leave the land of Israel. What was the reason Isaac couldn't leave the land of Israel?
He's a Corbin.
He was a carbon. What carbon means, he was offered as a sacrifice. I mean, God said, don't kill him. But once you bring, let's say it's a sheep, God said you can't bring a human being ever. He's even trying to prove that point. But once, and by the way, he went to the place, the future site of Jerusalem, and he was about to be offered as a sacrifice. And once you bring any, let's say it's an animal, up as a gift to God, even if you don't slaughter it, it becomes holy. That, and the same thing, Isaac became holy. So look at the second paragraph. Don't go down to Egypt. Isaac, you stay here. Isaac had in mind to go down to Egypt just as his father had gone down in the days of the famine. God said to him, don't go down to Egypt. You're a perfect burnt offering, meaning you weren't burnt, but you're a whole offering that was about to be designated. And being outside the Holy Land is not fitting for you. Which means that the Holy Land was his natural place, and it would have been beneath him because of his status, his holy status, to leave that domain. So the first thing that jumps out at us when we look at this verse is hundreds of years before the Holy Land became home to a Jewish nation, and before the Jewish people existed as a nation, the only Jewish people around were Isaac and Rivka and Yaakov and Esau. And already the land enjoyed a special status. Now, there are other statements in the Torah that reflect the special status, but it's a special status before they even conquered it. That's what's unusual. In the times of the forefathers, hundreds of years before the Jewish people were in Egypt and before they went after Egypt to the land of Israel and conquered the land of Israel, it already has a special status. But not only does it have a special status, it's got a bit more than that. And let's look. Here's what God said to Abraham. On that day, God formed a covenant with Abraham, this is his father, saying, quote, this is the verse, says it in the Torah, every Torah in the world. To your seed, I have given this land. What's the borders? From the river of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates River. Notice that it does not say, I will give your seed this land. I have given this land. As Rashi comments right away. Rashi comments that when God says, God's word is like a deed. It's like it's done already. When we say something, it's not done yet. But when God says something, it's already a fact. So when he says, to your seed, I have given the land, it does not say that I will give this land. I have given this land. So if we are looking for a reason why the land belongs to us, this is the reason. God gave it to us. Period. It has nothing to do with politics. Before we have control over it, God proclaimed it to Abraham that it's his. And even after we lost control over it, it's still ours. It's an eternal gift forever to the seed of Abraham, to the Jewish people. So why does the land belong to us? Because God gave it to us, period. What's interesting about this idea is that that reality that the land belongs to us also has practical, legal, I'm talking about legal in our world, legal ramifications. The fact that it belongs to us even before we conquered it. That's unusual. You don't find that anywhere. But here you do find it. There's an example of that where we see it pretty interestingly. Let me show you, you see it. Do you remember in the Torah, there's a story, a couple hundred years after this, the Jewish people were in the desert. They went to Egypt, and now they're in the desert before they came to the land of Israel. After the Torah was given, they weren't yet conquering the land of Israel. There were 5 women, the daughters of Slavcha. Remember the daughters of Slavcha?
Mhm.
Of Slavcha, their father died. Everybody was supposed to get they're supposed to get a portion of the land of Israel. Their father Slavcha passed away. They had no brothers. So they came to Moshe and they said, Moshe, why are we left out? Should we get, if our father died, there's no boys, but let us get the portion of land. Doesn't the portion of land belong to us? So the Talmud tells us that Moshe didn't know what to do. He asked God what to do. Most things he knew. This he didn't know. Asked the Talmud, and God said, yes, give it to me. Asked the Talmud, why was Moshe confused over here? It's actually pretty simple. An heir is an heir. You want to say the boys should get first? Okay. But they're not around, so why shouldn't they get it? Why was he confused? What was troubling him that he didn't know that they should get it? And the Talmud answers like this. You know why he was puzzled? Because the Jews never conquered the land. When a person owns something, physically, legally, and then they pass away, there's an inheritance to the children. The Jews never entered into the land yet. What was there to pass over? There was nothing given to them yet. So why were they actually given the land? They were given their father's portion. What portion? You never even saw the land. The reason is because God did promise the Jewish people the land of Israel. And because he promised, it has a legal ramification. He actually owned, Slavcha, their father, owned a part of the land of Israel. And that's what God told them. And they said, if you look, why should our father's name be eliminated from his family because he has no son? Give us a portion. So Moses brought it before God. And God said, I have given the Jewish people as an inheritance this land. Let them get it. They own it. So that's what's unusual. They own the land before they even conquered it. But they do own it. Why do they own it? Who says? God gave it. So God gave the land to Abraham to pass on to his children. And therefore the land already belonged to Tzlafchat. And therefore the land already belonged to his daughters. Legal precedent in this world. So what emerges is that the notion of ownership is not just some honorific title, it's real. So that's where we get until now. Now let's ask a question on this. Okay, so the Jewish people owned the land from the time when God promised it to Abraham, and they owned it before they even conquered it. But it's nice to say that. It's nice to say that God gifted the land to Abraham and it belonged to him and his descendants ever since then. But conventional wisdom, and practically speaking, there's Torah logic to say, to show it actually didn't belong to them until they actually conquered. And we're going to look at something. And we're going to say, actually, it'll be a contradiction. Because there's reason to say here that even the Torah will say, where do you see that? That they don't own it. Different than the way we're understanding it until now. I'll show you. I'll tell you. The proof of this is, are you familiar with the mitzvot, the commandments that take place when we get into the land of Israel? There's many commandments that have to do with the earth, with the land itself. What commandments? For example, truma. Truma is when you own a field in the land of Israel, and you have produce, you have fruits, you have grains, you're supposed to take a certain percentage, let's say 2% of the whole crop, and give it to a Kohen. And that food becomes holy. It's holy food. You're not, only a Kohen can eat it, he can't be impure, lots of laws. And there's dozens and dozens of mitzvot that relate to this, that relate to the holiness of the land of Israel. And we know the consensus is amongst the codifiers, amongst the Jewish, the Torah scholars, we're going to see in a second, is that when did that holiness take, and it only happens at the borders of the land of Israel. And when did that holiness converge on the land of Israel? When did it become that the land of Israel has this? Only when they conquered it, not before. So if you're a Jew, if you're a descendant of Abraham, and you lived in the land before they conquered it, you happen to be there, it's an individual, those laws didn't apply. And let's look at that. Let's look clearly where it says. Maimonides, this is Rambam. And the Rambam, in other words, just because a plot of land is included, here, Rambam says like this is the laws of Truma. Whenever Eretz Yisrael is mentioned, the intent is the lands conquered by the king of Israel or a prophet with the consent of the entire Jewish people. That's when it's Eretz Yisrael. This is called the conquest of the community. If, however, an individual Jew, a family, or a tribe goes and conquers a place for themselves before everybody else conquers it, even in the land given to Abraham, clearly the land given to Abraham, and they're there before the rest of the Jewish people they're conquering, it is not considered as Eretz Yisrael in the sense that one is obligated to observe all the mitzvahs there. And he continues, all of the lands the Jews who ascended from Egypt took possession of were sanctified in the first consecration of the land, when they conquered it. When by contrast, the descendants of the exiles in the second conquest took possession of the portion of land they consecrated a second time. This consecration is perpetuated forever for that time and for all time, which means before they arrived in Israel, was it a holy land? Did it make the fruits holy? Nope. Isn't this a contradiction to what we said before? we said that God said the Jewish people own the land before they get there. And the Rebbe addresses this question. And the Rebbe approaches this question. That's our next step to get here. And we can't say, remember, we can't say when Avram owned the land and his descendants owned the land, it's some kind of honor that he's giving him, even though he doesn't really own it. No, he really owned it because Tzlafchad was able to own it before he got it. He was able to pass it along to his children. So it was real. It was legal ownership. So how do you reconcile? On the one hand, it's not the Holy Land until they conquer it because they got to be there. The Rebbe explains like this. Here's how you got the question, guys. I'm asking over. You familiar? Do we have the question here?
Yeah.
Yes, I didn't hear. Yes. Okay. Good. Want to make sure you're with me? Yeah, you can put your finger. Okay. Here's the Rebbe's answer, and we're going to develop this. Beautiful. When we talk about God, quote unquote, giving us, the Jewish people, the land, there are two elements to it. One is conferring ownership of the land. You actually literally own the land. The second is granting sanctity and holiness to the land. In other words, by giving the land as a gift to a holy nation, and when they come in, then it became a holy land. When did it become sanctified? When did it have kedusha and sanctity in it? When they come there, they own it before, but it's not holy yet. Let's see that. God gave Avram the land before the land was ever conquered. Avram, you own it. Done. He told Avram that. He told Yitzchak that. He told Yaakov that. No uncertain terms. You're going to pass that land on to your children. As we learned before, the daughters of Tzlafchad inherited the land from the father. It was never even there. And actually, that's why God told him not to leave the land, not because of the holiness of the land, because he was holy. Remember, he was a korban, he was a sacrifice, and sustain your natural boundaries. But the holiness of the land, when do the special mitzvot of tithing and sabbatical? We're in a sabbatical of the year this year. Sabbatical year, you have to let your crops grow. So if you would have lived there before the conquest, there was no such thing. But once Israel conquered, you can't pick the crops during this year to sell them. When our ancestors conquered it, now it has holiness. The difference of ownership to holiness. 2 stages. Stage 1 is ownership. Stage 2, that happened with Abraham for all generations. Stage 2 is when the Jews came into the land of Israel 40 years after Egypt, they owned it. That's what the Rebbe says here. And the mitzvot of Israel only took place after it was conquered, which is when the Jews assumed the legal control over the land. Let's move this. So the question that we asked before, but now we'll get to a question. Now we'll get to a question. Did Israel only become ours when we conquered? That we answered. Yeah. And we answered, the Rebbe says there's 2 things. Here we are. A is the monetary element, the Jewish ownership, and B, the sanctity of the land. The first element, Jewish ownership of the land, was achieved by God giving the land of Israel to Abraham, our father, our patriarch. And the second element, the land of Israel's sanctity, especially the mitzvot, first occurred when the Jewish people entered the land. That's when it became a holy land. So far, so good. Any questions? Anybody have any comments they want to share or understand something that they're not sure about? Okay. Attention, that's for sure. Okay. All right. So this notion that the gift to Avram wasn't a full package yet. It was only partial package, only ownership package, not yet the holiness, is also explains why remember we said, besides the fact that God told him, I have given you the land already, it's already yours. We also find a verse later on that God says, I will give you land in the future. Now that's a real contradiction. Did you give it to them or are you going to give it to them? And the answer is, as we said, here we have it. And we'll get to text 6a. I will give you and your seed after you the land, the entire land. it is true that the verse states, and I will give you the seed after you, meaning in the future. So that's how we answer that contradiction. So gifting the land to Abraham was the ownership of the land. Conquering the land was the sanctity of the land. Okay. But now the question arises. That's nice. We understand clearly that this is our claim to the land ownership, and holiness came the second stage. But that's a technical answer. If you think about it, why was there such a distinction in the first place? Why did it have to be that way? God is giving him the land. God himself is doing it. Can he give him the sanctity at the same time? Why do you have to wait for the conquest later on? Isn't God's word considered, when he says something, as if it's a fact, the reality? So if he's going to give him the land, what changed that they only got the ownership, and later they got the second stage when it became a holy land for a holy people? Here's the question. Let's get to the question. Why can't the two elements take effect together? Why did there have to be a delay? Is what we're asking over here. Let's look at the question inside. So the question really is, what fundamental change did the Jewish people undergo between the time of the forefathers and the conquering of the land and the time of Joshua? There must have been a major change. There must have been something that made it change and made it holy. That wasn't enough before. What was that change? What accomplished? Or what was the reason it had to be that way? What was different?
Torah.
Pardon?
Torah was given down.
You bet. You bet. And that's what we're going to explain. You bet. Yes, Torah. But let's see what Torah was later. Yes. And the Torah was not yet in the time of Avram. So this is something we've explained, Rabbi has explained many times, but will give us insight as to broadening and explaining the sanctity issue as well. Let's read what the Rabbi says. He writes himself, he said this many times. But here he's going to give us it'll open up a new area, a new avenue. The difference between the mitzvot performed by the forefathers. Now, what do you mean the mitzvot? They were never commanded to do the mitzvot. When we call them mitzvot, at that time, Abraham, was before the Torah. So we know, that they were handed by prophecy all the mitzvot of the future. They didn't do it because they were commanded. They did it because they wanted to. So they also did all the mitzvot, but they weren't commanded. When did the Jewish people become commanded to do it? When the Torah was given, as you said yesterday. So let's read this paragraph now. The difference between the mitzvot performed by the forefathers before the Torah was given and the mitzvot performed by the Jewish people after the Torah was given has been discussed many times. And that is, inasmuch as the mitzvot before the Torah was given weren't obligatory, they weren't mandated by God, they were unable to transform the physical material of an object used for a mitzvah to confer upon it holy status of a mitzvah object. The effect of the mitzvah was only on the person performing it. In other words, they did mitzvot. But did the object become a godly object? There was a divide between heaven and earth, between spiritual and physical. And when Abram would take an ox hide, the hide of an ox, and if he made tefillin out of the hide of an ox, and if he wrote the parchments on the hide of the ox, and he took ink and made it and formed it and had tefillin, that may have been a nice idea, may have elevated him, but the oxide remained oxide. Why shouldn't it? It's physical. There was a divide. Because you can't make something physical into a spiritual object unless God commands you to do it and gives you that the ability to do it. Then you could, otherwise you can't do it. He can make himself spiritual, and he did, but the object didn't become spiritual, godly, holy. In other words, as we're continuing on the page, the formal command when the Torah was given created the notion of, quote unquote, a holy object existing in this world. Something can become a channel for a mitzvah to be performed with it and through it. The object becomes a mitzvah object. When a person performs the mitzvah, holiness is stamped into a physical, nowadays, is stamped into a physical object, rendering it a holy object. I've mentioned a number of times. There's a halacha, when you take the branches off the sukkah, the schach, and you put it on the ground, you're not supposed to step on them. Not because it's representative, it's symbolic. Because there's godliness inherent in that object. God took down the divide, the great divide between the spiritual and the physical, and now it becomes okay. So now that we got that far, the same applies to the land of Israel. This is the key here. Though the Jewish people already owned the land of Israel before they owned it legally. And why did they own it? Because God had spoken to that effect. God said, I'm giving it to you. It's given to you. You own it. You have it. But the sanctity couldn't yet be stamped into the physical land. Until what? They were commanded to take the fruit and do something with it. However, after the Torah was given, and even before the people conquered it, it became possible. In other words, once the Torah was in the desert, I'm pausing here for a second. The Torah was in the desert, and now they got the commandments. After the Torah was given, it's like a semi-stage. Even before the people conquered it, it became possible for the land of Israel to become holy, because God commanded them to conquer it. As a result of God's command to conquer it. So now it could become holy. Once he commanded them to conquer it, he told them, go in, alei reish, it says, alei rosh, go inherit the land, go and conquer. So because God commanded them to conquer the land, that's when they could take the land and change its dynamic. So when the last sentence, when the Jewish people took over the land by conquering it, the holiness of the land was established because they were commanded to go in there and inherit that land physically. Inherit physically, now you can change it to a spiritual dynamic. That's how the Rebbe explains this thing. So it's very interesting. Let's go. A very interesting point here is, let's think about the world situation in Abraham's time versus the situation when the Jewish people took ownership of it or conquered it hundreds of years later. So when Yitzchak was born, anybody know the year from creation? I bet you some people do. We've mentioned this. When Abraham was born, what year was it from creation?
1948.
1948, from creation. Yitzchak was born when Abraham was 100 years old. So he was born in the year 2048. So from the year 2048, the day Yitzchak was born, which was on Passover, Pesach, 440 eventful years took place. Yaakov, the 12 sons, going to Egypt. Yosef ruled Egypt. And they finally left Egypt 2,448, 440 years after Isaac was born. They went straight to Sinai, and that's when everything changed. So, yeah. Okay. So let's look at, and we've been mentioning that reality was, as you mentioned before, when heaven came down to earth, God descended on Mount Sinai, and now they were mandated by God to bring about holiness in the land of Israel. So we could not have used the word Holy Land before the Torah was given. Land doesn't become holy. Abraham assumed ownership, but it's not yet holy land. When did the earth have sanctity in it? After the Torah was given. And that's why, by the way, after now the Torah was given, after they conquered. By the way, the second stage of individual conquering, when each person, that was even a deeper stage. It says, so that's the reason when you go to the Kotel HaMaravi, you go to the Western Wall in Israel, and the place we go to and we pray in front of the wall is actually not inside the temple. That's the outside wall. We're standing outside. of the temple. We're actually right. When people prayed in the temple, they prayed the opposite direction. They would, if they would be praying facing us when we go to Israel. We're facing the western wall. That's the western wall. They faced west. We're facing east. So when you go to the around, if you want to go to the other side of the wall, there's, I don't know if they'll let you anymore, but there's big signs there. A Jew is not allowed to go there. Why can't, according to Torah law at this moment in time, because we have a certain level of impurity, we have to become purified through the red heifer and through the mikveh, a couple of stages. So that's why, because the ground is holy. It's like you're going into the actual temple. The holiness never left the ground, is what the Talmud says. That ground is, it's like going to the temple itself, no difference. So until we become purified, that's when we'll go in the right way. And that's because there's sanctity in the earth. Physically, the physical earth. So now let's go back. And this sanctity that's saturated in this land, that deepens our appreciation of what our claim to the land is to begin with. You know, you have all types of events and circumstances, and there's a lot of real estate changes hands. It went from the Jewish people, the Israelites, to the Babylonians. It went to the Romans. It went to the Turks. It went to the British. And then a government of fierce-looking Jewish immigrants from all over the world took over the land. But the Jewishness of Israel that was imbued by God, that remained constant all the time. Didn't matter who was there. So it was God's land, and it's a holy land. Now we can understand a little bit better the first Rashi. Okay, Rashi has a lot of comments on the entire Torah. And we open up the first comment on the first book of the Torah, the first sentence of the Torah, a famous comment on Rashi. And let's look at what he says. Rebbe once took this Rashi, he translated it word for word, and then he did it again twice. He wanted to make a message. Let's see what that says. Okay. Let's move this over here. And let's get into the Rashi. Here we go. Okay. Here's Rashi. The Torah says, in the beginning, God created the heaven and earth. That's what it says. Rashi says, Rabbi Yitzchak said, shouldn't the Torah have started with a different verse? The verse, this month is to you, that was the first commandment that the Israelites were commanded, which was 2,448 years later. That's where the Torah should have started, with the laws commanded to the Jewish people. That's a book of laws. Says Rashi, second line from the bottom, why then does it begin with, in the beginning, with the story of creation? Why start a book of laws with the story of creation? That's Rashi's question. Answers Rashi. The reason is reflected in the verse. The strength and might of his works, he related to his people. Why did God want to show his power over the creation? To give them the inheritance of the nations. If, says Rashi, the nations of the world should say to Israel, you are robbers, for you conquered by force the lands of the 7 nations of Canaan, and they did, and they took it away from the Canaanites. That was their conquering. We will reply. Well, it doesn't say we. I translated that wrong. They will reply. The entire earth belongs to the Holy One, blessed be He. He created it, and He gave it to whomever He deemed proper. When He wished, He gave it to the Canaanites. And when He wished, He took it away from them, gave it to us. So in other words, what is Rashi simply saying? If the world comes to you and says, it's our land, you're stolen, you guys are thieves, you don't belong there, it's not yours, BVS, the answer to them is, God gave it to us. In fact, He once gave it to the Canaanites, but then He took it away from them and gave it to us. And He gave it to us eternally, forever. So there's an interesting point in this, besides the simple, and that's I've argued, by the way, that the best argument we have, better than the argument for international law, better than the argument for survival, better than the argument for we've been there for thousands of years, is one that we have a deed, we have a document. It's called the Torah. God gave it to us. That one they can't. The other ones, if the nations of the world gave it to us in 1948, then they could take it away from us. What right do we have if they want to take it away? If the UN says it doesn't belong to you, if they will say it doesn't belong to you anymore? But that's not our argument. The Rebbe is against that argument. Let's go further. So the Rebbe has a very interesting point about the Rashi we just read. Besides the simple, the plain, open meaning, which is one of the most important things there. And his comment is like this. Let's understand. Rashi says the nations of the world are going to come to you, and they will say to you, "You are thieves." If the nations will come to you and say, "You are thieves. You stole, you're robbers. You stole the land of Israel from the Canaanites, or from anybody else." The question that we can ask on that is, we can actually, there's a counter argument that we can produce to answer that without going into what we just said. Why don't we just tell them, you don't know how history works throughout the world? You could tell the nations of the world that they say it doesn't belong to us. You don't know that one nation conquers another and it becomes their land. I mean, it's thousands of years, hundreds of countries, thousands of wars. The one who conquered won it, and nobody ever came back to them and said, "You're thieves." They won it. That was it. Is it painful? Is it nice? That's not nice, but it's a reality. So what kind of argument is that? You stole it. We conquered it. Why can't the Jews say, "We conquered it, so it's ours"? Everybody else did the same thing. The Rebbe says that's not what they're arguing. They're actually arguing something else. Because that argument doesn't make sense. They wouldn't argue that argument. Who would say it's yours because you conquered it? Every nation conquers and becomes theirs. That's not their argument. It's something like this. Their argument is, we know that your claim to the land of Israel is that forever and for all times, it's not allowed. Even if somebody else conquers it, you're going to say it's yours. That's stealing. You're doing different than the rest of the world does. You're taking the land of Israel and putting it into a different category than anything else in the world. You have now created a new entity that, even if we take it back, it's not ours. How could you say that you're a thief? You're a thief not because you conquered it. They wouldn't say that. You're a thief because you put a new pattern into the world that doesn't fit with any other country. It's special. It's unique. It's forever the Jewish people's. That's what they're bothered with. That's what the Jewish people have to answer. Yes, it's different. You know why it's different? You're right. God made it different. In the beginning, he gave it to the Canaanites. And then he said he's going to give it to the Jewish people. And he gave it forever to the Jewish people. So besides that, we conquered it. So that's the conquest of the land of Israel is different if you look at the text. As the Rebbe says it inside. From when the Jewish people took the lands of the seven nations, the land itself changed. You changed land. You gave it a new sanctity. Before, it had been a land like other lands, which could belong to any nation. But from the moment it was conquered by the Jewish people, it was transformed into the land of Israel. A Jewish land through and through, and for all time, to the extent that it can no longer belong to any other nation. That's not fair. You can't do that. The Gentiles also know that once the Jewish people took the lands of the seven nations, it became Eretz Yisrael forever. They know that. And this is precisely why they claim to be robbers. Inasmuch as before the Jewish people conquered it, it was a land like all other lands. It could belong to any nation. The Jewish people don't have the right to take the land of Israel in such a way that it will be taken from them forever. That's robbery. Very, very interesting. The answer to that claim is the entire earth belongs to the Holy. When he created it, he has the right to transform the land's quality. He made the world. That's why the Torah begins with Bereshis, with creation. Since he made the world, he has the right to transform the quality of a land that used to be the land of the nations to a land, an earth, a physical earth that's exclusively the land of Israel. He has the right to do it. That's why the Torah begins with in the beginning. So anyone can respect our position as a deeply held conviction. The truth is, argued this. I heard him arguing it. He says that if the Jewish people in Israel would say this with conviction, they wouldn't argue the same way. It's not like everybody would agree with you and go along with it, but it would be accepted in a different way. Every time we made all those arguments before, didn't get anywhere. But more importantly than impressing upon the nations to accept it, the Jewish students have to know this. Jewish people have to know this. We're going to conclude with a letter from the Rebbe to, this was to, I think, Zalman Shazar. Okay. President Zalman Shazar, he was the president of Israel, Zalman Shazar. And one time he wrote to the Rebbe, he used to get letters back and forth. And he did not refer in his letter, the Rebbe didn't refer to it as the state of Israel. I think he referred to it as something else, Holy Land or something like that, but he avoided using the term the state of Israel. That was not against that. So he wrote to the Rebbe, what do you mean? What's going on? And here's the Rebbe's answer. Let's look at this answer. This is what he wrote. I have received complaints, writes the Rebbe in the letter. Why do I invoke, quote, the biblical land of Israel? That's what he said, the Holy Land, and the covenant with Abraham in connection with modern Israel? Why do I use that? That was the complaint that Rebbe got. He's using biblical land. Why do I mix God into the picture? After all, they say, those who fought for the creation of the state, those who led it, those who currently direct it, and its authorized representatives, they all proclaim and take pains to emphasize that Israel is a state founded in 1948. So why am I saying Holy Land? That's what the question, the complaint that Rebbe got. And here's the Rebbe's answer. My answer, put frankly, is that their narrative is false. No new entity was created in 1948. Rather, that was the year in which a large part of the land of Israel was liberated. Liberated, yes, but it's not a new entity. An entity established in 1948 based on the agreement or the authorization of the nations of the world has no strength or justification in terms of an authentic response to the claim you are thieves for having conquering the land belonged to others, a claim raised by the Arabs, the Vatican, the United Nations, some Jews as well. This is why it's so crucial to underscore this God-given homeland. In other words, the Rebbe said, if you're going to base your claim on what the nations of the world say, I don't have a response, you don't have a response to the nations. They're going to say you're thieves. It belongs to others. What's your response? And the Rebbe continued, I did not delude myself into imagining that these just and honest arguments, he said they're just arguments, will prevail in the the Rebbe's arguments, will prevail in the United Nations, the Vatican, etc. Nevertheless, transmitting the truth is critical for the morale of Jewish youth living in the Holy Land, including those serving the IDF, for Jewish American students, he's talking then about Jewish American students, and for the Jewish youth of other countries as well. They need to hear it. They have to know how deep and how connected this land is to them. That conviction is what you need. So Israel is not only a land with a promise, but it's a promised land. And that's what's needed. This kind of a feeling, this kind of approach, simple approach. God gave us the land. By the way, many of the Arab nations around Israel believe in the Bible. They believe in the Bible and they see it. So if you believe in it, they're going to have a different kind of respect. Not like you're looking for, if you say international argument, I'm looking for the goyim to approve me. That's weak. It's weak. It's not wrong, by the way, because it's actually a good precedent and survival for sure, and biblical history for sure. But the main claim is it's a holy land, it's a holy people, and it was given by God, and that's a good answer. That's a good answer. It's actually a good answer. The real mission of the land of Israel, living as a holy nation in a holy land. When you do that, it will be so. Sounds That's what it's about. That's what it's about. Any comments?
Ishikar,
I think it behooves us to use that language in all of our communications with the outside world.
Yes, but not to take somebody's nose off, just to tell them the truth. You know, tell them the truth, in honesty, in a good way. And it's a special land. It's a special land, and the Jewish people are given the land. You're right. Agreed. By the way, I think one time, you know, Chaim Herzog, many, many years ago, was in the UN. He was representative ambassador. And he heard the Rebbe saying this all the time. And one time in one of these arguments, there were so many, he said it. He said it straight. He'll try it. So the people that were debating him in the UN actually didn't have what to say. And someone said, that's true, but you're not the Jewish people. Something like that. They accepted the argument. God did give it to the Jewish people. So whatever. The point is that it's that they didn't argue with the premise that God gave it to the Jewish people. And that argument that they argued would never get through. You're not the Jewish people. Everybody knows you're Jewish. Anyway, so that's any other comments? Any other questions or comments you want to share? I thank you.
Ishikar, thank you.
Thank you very much for joining. And we'll see you Shabbos in the next few days. Yes.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You're welcome. Okay, good night, everybody.
Thank
Good night.
you.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. Good night, everyone.
Night. Night.
Good night. Thank you.